Welcome to Speaking in Spoons, the Chronically Ill podcast, with your host, Christina Brookman.
My name is Christina Brookman, and I am your host with Speaking in Spoons with a lovely co host, Lexi and Nate. And today we are talking about a book or a comic book, Ripple Effects, which is about invisible disability. And we have the creator, writer, and colorist, Jordan Hart, and Barbara Dillon, who is the editor in chief of Fanbase Press. And we're nerding out and just so excited to have both of you here today. I am lucky enough to have known Barbara back since college. So this is exciting to see just how your life and career has blossomed. And Jordan, when she was posting about this comic book, I just got so excited because all three of us have chronic conditions. And at times they're invisible conditions. At times we use like mobility devices. So we kind of meld in between those two worlds. And I am always excited when the conversation of invisible disability is brought to the surface in an educational way, but also this is a fun way too. In a way, when I was teaching, I used to call myself a X-Men because I have a genetic disorder, and that was my way of laughing at it and helping my students understand. So I just think what you're doing is amazing. I'm going to I just wanted to ask give you an opportunity, both of you, to introduce yourself, and let us know a little bit, our followers know more about the project and why you're here. Jordan, can you let them know a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for the kind words. So my name is Jordan Hart, as you mentioned, writer creator of Ripple Effects, which is a story about a he should be a superhero, but he's not exactly sure if he can be, because while he is invincible, he has type 1 diabetes. So really the core concept is, imagine Superman, but instead of kryptonite, it's a chronic illness that is his worry and concern about stepping into the public spotlight and being a superhero. And this story is directly derived from my own personal experience of having a incurable blood clotting disease, also a genetic mutation, to which also in the back of Ripple Effects, I have the closing essay that I wrote, and there's a picture of me dressed as Cyclops from when I was 8 years old. And it talks about how my whole life I wished I would be a mutant. That's all I wanted, was to become a mutant. And I finally became one when I was 25. But like, I didn't get enough.
I read that and I was like,
like yeah, yeah. So lifelong comic fan and comic reader. And, this is just a story that meant a lot to me personally. It's my first superhero story. I usually write horror, science fiction, even some humor, some comedy. But this felt like the right premise to bring me into superheroes. So it's a very grounded story. It's very much about George's life as a diabetic, and then the tights and the superhero part of it really is almost the B story. I'd say the A story is just everyday life living with incurable disease, which is something millions and millions of Americans alone live with.
yes.
So I just wanted to capture what it's like to live with that, and to, also balance that, being a superhero. It's really a metaphor for me as someone with an invisible illness. I was thinking the most common thing I hear when people find out is you don't look sick. That's what they immediately say. Like, but you don't look
Yes.
sick. You don't look sick. Like almost questioning it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, in my day job in a professional setting and also in some social settings, my illness is something I hide, like Peter Parker would hide that he's Spider-Man, like Clark Kent hides that he's. It felt like a double identity,
Yeah.
which really just felt like a perfect way into this story. So there's a lot of like my life worked into this story. And a prime example, and we can transition to Barbara here, but Barbara and Bryant Dillon, who published Ripple Effects, had been my friends for maybe 6 or 7 years. They had no idea. Like they had no idea that I had a chronic illness until I pitched this story. And that's what they
Wow.
found out. It's just those life experiences worked into this into the story.
Uh, I think that's amazing. I think especially what you've done in the comic, also bringing in other people's experiences in chronic illnesses. There's essays with people from different different chronic illnesses. I know there was type 2 diabetes as well, chronic fatigue. I had not actually heard this, but myalgia, am I messing that up? In encephalomyelitis, known as ME, paranoid schizophrenia, and MS. Like you just got a great collection of people's experiences and collaboration to add to this. And I think that makes that especially unique. Um, Barbara, did you want to talk about, we'd love to hear what drew you and Bryant to this project.
Absolutely. And first and foremost, thank you all so much for having both Jordan and I here on the podcast. We love the show and what you've been doing and all of the folks that you've been speaking to. And honestly, it goes to a lot of what we try to do at Fanbase Press with all of our catalog of books, and especially with Ripple Effects, in that we want to provide a platform for creators to be able to share not only their voices, but their lived experiences. So for us, it's very important that every book at Fanbase Press that we publish not only is fun or entertaining or thoughtful, but it does so with a deeper message at heart and with characters that truly resonate with readers. And those readers can be of all age groups. They can be of all backgrounds, of all identities. And that's what's most important to us. We want everyone to be represented throughout our entire catalog. So when Jordan, whom we had known for many years, and he's a wonderful human being in addition to being a super talented creator as well. But when he brought us the pitch for Ripple Effects, we were just so captured by his authenticity in sharing his story and the intention behind sharing it. I mean, it had lived with him for 10 years before he started putting it out in the world. And so for him to be so vulnerable to share that with us and be so thoughtful to want to help others to feel that they can also be seen, and that they too can be superheroes in their own right, was such a wonderful and thoughtful intention and message behind this story, and intention of Jordan's as well. So we were, I think from the minute we read it, Bryant and I were like looking at each other like, let's ask Jordan if it's okay that we publish this, because it's wonderful and it's beautiful. And then having, Christina, as you mentioned, the opportunity to bring other individuals with other invisible disabilities or illnesses and share their stories and relate it to Jordan's, to share that, there is this connective tissue between all of us. We may have different lived experiences for each of us, but there is that connective tissue in being able to be vulnerable and being able to relate our stories to one another. So
Absolutely. We've been talking about that a lot too, that like we are a family, we're a community. And I love what you wrote, Jordan, about wanting to help other people with a chronic condition not feel alone. Because I think there is there is that isolation that happens for so many of us. And so that's exactly like, that's what we're trying to do with this podcast. And I love that, was your intention. And I believe it's effective with your comic book of helping people feel seen and heard, when so many aren't, in a community that can feel voiceless and isolated. And then it brings us, storytelling brings us together, and stronger. And that's what this does. Oh, I had some things that I wanted to ask. I did want to know, oh, Matthew No, who was the librarian from Harvard Medical School. I loved his intro, because he talked about a lot of things, and he talked about, like, with the diabetes that George has, it's called an invisible disability, but it isn't. And what he was saying about that is that, he does do the insulin. He does have to do, there's certain things that are there, but the people often ignore. And if they don't ignore, people don't want to see, because it makes you have to go to a place that I think is hard for a lot of people, and face your own mortality, and vulnerability. And I'd love to know, and I think you wrote about this a little bit, but what was it about diabetes specifically that you chose this, as the chronic illness for George, your superhero, versus a different chronic illness?
Yeah. So again, thank you for all those kind words. That's really awesome. And I'm glad that it hit everything we set out to do. But for me, originally George had thrombophilia, what I have, which is incurable blood clotting disease. And as Barbara mentioned, part of the reason this sat with me for 10 years is because it was just so hard to write. Like, I've never had trouble writing ever. And it was just opening too many wounds, and I just thought I could never get it out there. I'm like, this is a great idea, but it's just like, I don't know, I can't do this. And then finally I was like, this has to get out there, like, this story has to get out there. And if I need to change the invisible illness, that's fine. So the reason why I picked type 1 is that one of my best friends in my day job, one of my colleagues, he has been a type 1 diabetic since he was 7 years old. And we work in a field where we were partnered together. So we would share and commiserate our struggles a lot, like a lot of times, only we knew what each other was going through. Like, if it was a sick day, I could actually be in the hospital and it would just be a sick day. And I would just tell my friend that, and same thing with him, like, we never really got into the details. So, that being said, he, loved comics. That's how we became such good friends. I told him about this and I said, will you help me tell an accurate type 1 story? Because that's all that mattered to me, was that if I'm going to change the illness, it has to be accurate. Like, I can't just make assumptions. I can't, like, I can put the and I did put the more internal emotional side of chronic illness into the story, which is what I did. But I needed someone to help me put the physical accuracy into it. And that's what my friend Perry could do. So that's truly why it was switched to that, because I knew he could really help me tell an accurate story.
That's incredible, because you're so right in that the authenticity is so important, because oftentimes, stories are told, and, like, we'll watch things and we're like, well, that's not really accurate, or things. So it's nice that was so important to you. And I get why that is so important to you, because of your lived experience and having that shared experience with your friend. Like, Lexi and I call each other soul sisters sometimes, because we both actually have the same disorders, and some of them are very rare, like, what you have. And when you find somebody that knows what you feel, that's and Nate has always been my soulmate since I met him. We're supposed to run away to Alaska together because it's cold and neither of us regulate our body temperature. But what was your favorite part of creating this? Was this cathartic for you at all, or like healing?
I think so. I think it was very healing. But I would say also just growing up an X-Men fan, like when I originally came up with this idea, I'll be honest, I was like, this is an X-Men story. Like I wanted this to be an X-Men story. Like if anything could have happened, at Marvel, but of course, like I wasn't at that level as a writer. You know what I mean? Like if it would have even gotten to Marvel, they would have brought in a scripter, and that's just I just wasn't there yet, developed enough. So then like basically I just started thinking about it more, and I was like, why play in someone else's sandbox if I can make my own? So
It's your baby.
that was like, especially with the story this personal, and it was like I decided that probably if I had this idea for 10 years at the 5-year mark, I was like, no, this is its own thing. So creating the other superheroes was a blast. Creating the super villain and like creating the reveal of the villain, which is something I really wanted to focus on to make it a surprise. Hopefully you were surprised, but that was very important to me. So like doing that. And then even like something as simple as the costumes, like pulling reference to Bruno the artist, like what about this and like that, and like basically just creating my own world of superheroes was an absolute blast. So I'd say that, for sure.
That's incredible. It's nice that you found fun in your catharsis, like to be able to do it for a vehicle that makes you so joyous is, I think, wonderful. Do you see future for potential future versions of Ripple Effects? Like, where do you see taking this story?
Oh yeah,
like without revealing anything, but like, is there a potential for this to grow? Because I think I'm just gonna say, as a comic book fan, but also as someone with an invisible illness, I've heard it's we were just talking about, Lexi and I, this earlier, are there other comic books about invisible illness? I did hear, because we have Ehlers-Danlos, someone, a woman is making a comic book right now about Ehlers-Danlos. But other than that and Ripple Effects, I haven't heard anything. I'd love to.
Anything
do you have any
knowledge?
recommend?
I can answer the first part, and I'll hand it over to Barbara for the second.
Yeah.
So to answer your Ripple Effects question, yes, this is a world that I would love to come back to. I would say, like right now, I could probably run up to 50 issues just right now, just based on stuff, the characters, everything is there, the world is there. So that would be great. That would be a dream one day to get there. So yes, there is. Consider this the opening chapter, I would say. Really, like we learn who George is, we learn George's story. Like now, the next natural step would him becoming a hero, right? This is very much like Batman year one. Like this is Ripple year one. Like there's lots of
so much to tell.
Yeah. So there's so much to tell. But as far as stories like this, I'll hand it over to Barbara, because we found out while making this about the whole community while we were creating Ripple Effects.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there's actually a wonderful organization called Graphic Medicine International Collective. And Matthew Ngo, who you mentioned, who is a librarian at Harvard Medical School. He's also one of the board members for Graphic Medicine International Collective, as is Dr. Teresa Rojas, who writes the first essay in the book. For those who may be unfamiliar with the term graphic medicine, it's actually a genre of comic books, and it's the convergence of exactly what you're hearing in the title. It's the convergence of the field of medicine with comic books. And there are really two types, I would say, of different kinds of comic books that fall within graphic medicine. One can be very prescriptive in that a doctor might make a comic book to educate people about COVID. What is COVID? How do you get a vaccine? How does the vaccine help? So it's more educational than anything else.
Right.
The other type is more narrative based, more like Ripple Effects, or there are also many memoirs, graphic memoirs, which share individuals' lived experiences with their own illness, whether it's a visible or invisible illness. And it covers the entire field of medicine. It doesn't have to be just a physical or invisible illness or disability. It can be something with mental health. It can be really anything that falls under the umbrella of medicine. So there are lots of stories out there, but as with everything, there can always be more representation, even in just working with Matthew on this. We learned that unfortunately the amount of graphic medicine stories about diabetes are actually relatively small. And of course, if you dig deeper into each different illness that's discussed or tackled within graphic medicine stories, those stories through the lens of a marginalized individual or even fewer. So there can always be more. It's wonderful that this genre exists and that it's becoming more popular and more visible. However, there can always be greater strides in greater visibility and representation within it.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely incredible, because I think it's something that makes a topic that could be intimidating or uncomfortable more palatable, and also for all different ages. Even though, like, this is Ripple Effects is a narrative story, it's still educational in a way, and makes it educational in a way that doesn't necessarily feel educational, which is, I think, always the best way, is to get people learning without thinking about learning, and then because I do this thing, Spoony Sundays, and I'm sure Jordan, you've heard of the spoon theory. Have you heard of the spoon theory?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we named the podcast Speaking in Spoons. But on Spoony Sundays, I just do like a quick little update. And I think it was this past one we were talking about ripple effects. And I was talking about, oh goodness, what was I talking? I was talking about so many things, because I was so tired. But really, that idea that, and this is going back to kind of what you were saying about you and your coworker with diabetes. You guys knew what was going on, but the rest of the world doesn't necessarily know what's going on, because I was making the comment that a lot of people say that you don't look sick. But when they see a lot of us, it's because we were able to make it out the door, and they don't realize what it took to get dressed, to get okay. And it doesn't mean we still don't feel like crap, but we're not, it's not us at our worst or like our medium. There's all different kinds of levels to this, and what I love about ripple effects too, and the idea of mixing like the superhero and the invisible illness or disability of any kind, is that when you're battling something, it takes so much incredible strength physically, and I think mentally, to battle like this on a daily basis. And I think that's representative of that superhero part in a way, so that's just, I think that's really cool. Lexi, Nate, did you have any questions?
Well, I just as someone who also loves comics, I think this really fits, it fits really well with Marvel, because Marvel has really started to pick people with illnesses. And I think that's what's almost their superpower, is that they have this illness. Like with Moon Knight, he had the dissociative identity disorder, and with Daredevil, he's blind. And it's just like these things that you think would be weaknesses actually end up being strengths in a lot of ways. And I think that really, that you're entering a field that has so much potential. Like if you really built it out, I feel like you're making your foray, and I feel like this is more of a compliment than a question.
I feel that way too. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Let's see if I can make this into a question. Like, how do you see Ripple Effect as a universe, which is ultimately what I think is like the penultimate of the comic?
Yeah, so I think what it does is, you know, it frees me up a lot to just focus on character and story now that we know the whole background of the health, right? You know, like you could just show one panel of George checking his glucose, we get it. You know what I mean? So like we can get much more into the relationships, and I feel like much more into, you know, the anxiety of having a chronic illness. You know, it's just like Christina mentioned, it's like just getting out the door sometimes, you know what I mean? So like is that, you know, there's an emergency, but he's crashing, he's not
Yeah.
feeling good. What's that going to do? Where is that going to put him? You know what I mean? So it's like to do that in, you know, an interesting way, in a character driven way. I mean, that's fun. I mean, at its core, I feel like just the superheroes and the world of Ripple Effects could be a fun superhero story by itself. But then you add the layer of the chronic illness, and I think that's where it really becomes its own thing, and it really kind of opens new doors, you know. And it's funny, the comment you said about, you know, learning. I'm going to butcher this quote, which is terrible because it's like the reason I wrote Ripple Effects and kept it in mind every day. But it's essentially Aristotle said that, you know, the key to writing a story is to teach the audience without them knowing. It's just like, you know, like, and that was really my goal with Ripple Effects. Like I wanted it to stand on its own as a superhero story, like if it needed to, but also educate and more so give a glimpse into what life with the chronic illness is like, you know. So that was really the balancing act that I worked on with Barbara and Brian. You know, they knew that was my goal as well. So they were just phenomenal editors at like, oh, you can do this, do that. You know what I mean? Like really kind of helping me balance it, because it's a fine line, you know, like it's a fine line from being really, you know, on the nose with the medical side of it,
Yeah.
or brushing over it, you know what I mean? So it was like, it was a tightrope to walk, but like luckily with their help, I was able to pull it off, hopefully to pull it off. That was, you know, that was the goal.
Well, and Barbara, could you talk to what that's like as an editor? Coming in, like, how are you using like that outside eye, like Jordan was talking about, and are do you have, and Brian, have any experiences that you were bringing into this?
Those are great questions. Coming to this, I, in addition to working in comics and many other different fields in my day jobs, I've also worked in the mental health field. So a lot of trying to be super mindful about ensuring that Jordan's voice, and we try to do this with all of our books, we want the creator's voice to stand paramount to the story and their vision for it. But especially in this case, given that this is his lived experience, and he wanted to put that, as well as Perry's, his friend's lived experience, forward through George, we wanted to ensure that we were being mindful of, and this, I'm sure that, you know, your viewers can empathize with this, but in a lot of stories that maybe we've viewed or consumed through different mediums to date, when there are attempts for representation, sometimes it's really hard for that one single representation to represent everybody and the diversity of experiences and what it can look like. So it's really hard to be able to do that. So we wanted to first single in on George's experience, which is a sort of a combination of Jordan and Perry's experiences. So we wanted to do that first. But in going deeper and being more mindful, we wanted to ensure, and this is more of a mental health term, that we were doing a person first narrative, and a positive one at that, meaning that this is not a diabetes person. This is a person who has, so they are the person first. They're an individual who happens to have diabetes and lives with that. So we wanted the person to be the most important aspect of the story. And we didn't want it to be a story, again, going back to, perhaps prior representations of identity. We didn't want it to be George has to learn to overcome having diabetes, that is the struggle in and of itself. Because for many individuals who have disabilities and illnesses, we've seen that all before, and that's not the biggest struggle. Everyone lives day to day with whatever their affliction may be. We want a larger story than that, and so that's exactly what we tried to do with Ripple Effects. This was this was George, who happened to live with diabetes, and as Jordan very astutely mentioned, we saw what that day-to-day life is like for George, but we wanted to go far beyond that. That was not the be-all end of the story, that George had diabetes. We wanted it to be something much greater, and so that's where the superhero aspect and kind of wrestling with what is life like as a superhero who happens to have an invisible illness or invisible disability. So that's what we really tried to bring forward with the story and working with Jordan and collaborating.
Yeah, I love that. And, we say all the time in the community, or people say like, I am not my disease, and there's that fight for like the recognition of what you have and the validation for it, but also the separation. And I am so many other things. And I think that, this is a great vehicle of doing that. I'd be interested in knowing, like, what has this meant to Perry, the two of you working on this, the collaboration, and also the ability to see himself represented in the comic venue.
He's absolutely thrilled. Like he has loved it. He's, as I said, the bonus of being a childhood comic fan on top of it, you know what I mean? Like, he was just over the moon to be able to help. And it's funny, like he was very respectful, because Perry is he's a writer. He's a professional copywriter, right? So he writes for a living. He's phenomenal. And I could tell there'd be times where like he'd have to hold back, or he'd want to give like writing notes. It's like, nope, I'm not here. I'm not here to give writing notes. I'm here to focus on this. So, it was great, but he's loved it. And we've seen the reactions just at Comic-Cons, at signings, like people with invisible illnesses coming up, seeking the book out. And for me, that's what this whole thing is about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, more than anything, it's like people coming up and just looking at the page, reading the story, and just seeing themselves and like feeling like they're being seen, and there's a really pivotal scene in issue 3 where George's team of superheroes find out, not through him, that he has diabetes, and he's devastated. Not to spoil too much, but he's just devastated. And it's exactly for what you said, is that for me personally, I want people to understand where I am or where I'm going from, but like, I don't want to be treated differently, and after most people find out, they do treat you differently. This is something that Matthew No really touches on in his essay, as well as Jasmine Joyner. They both really talk about this, how Matthew No says he is treated completely different on the days he has a cane as opposed to the days he doesn't.
Yes.
And Jasmine Joyner said the same thing. She they share a story about being at Disneyland, and being exhausted, and they'll be like, "We're not going anywhere until you can get up and go." And Jasmine was saying, "Please go. I'm fine. Just go. Like, now I feel bad that I'm ruining your day. Like, just go."
Yeah.
So that was probably one of the most important things for me to capture in Ripple Effects, was to like just show that you want to be understood, but you don't want to be treated differently.
Mm-hmm. We want that sense of normalcy. That's come up a lot. We've started this season interviewing people with disabilities, and that's kind of like the one repeated thing, the two things, not feeling like they're heard
Mhm.
and just wanting to be normal.
Mhm.
And I love Nate was like, but normal's boring. So like we're learning to embrace our weird, but you still want the societal normacy or like to not change is hard, you
Yeah.
know? Change
Mhm.
is very hard, and that grieving process. Um uh was there with the people that you collaborated with that wrote the essays with the different illnesses, was there one in particular that you found you really identified with that maybe you were surprised that you would, or
Um, all of them touched me incredibly deeply. You know what I mean? Like incredible, and on just like I was not expecting. You know, I mean,
yeah,
I was, but like just blew me away, right? But if I had to personally select the one that I felt like physically and emotionally the closest to, it would be Amanda Lawson's essay about MS. Just because she was going, I got sick when I was 25. So
hmm,
I was okay before that, and then I got sick when I was 25. She was about the same age. Um, it really affected her career dreams as it did mine. So
yeah,
there was just a lot of, connective tissue there. And to your point, and to Barbara's point, like we have wildly different illnesses, but the lived experience of them was
yeah,
so close and so similar. You know what I mean? That Amanda Lawson's one, like I just cried the whole time, like the whole time, because it just felt like me, you know what I mean? So I would say, yeah, hers was just on that level, what I connected with the most, just the similarities.
yeah. And I think it's amazing how, like you said, you can have completely different disorders, but the lived experience is shared, that connectivity. And that's
Mhm.
why we're a family, but it can blow you away sometimes. So I think it's just so special that you've done this, because I think it's really going to hit home for a lot of people, and even people without invisible disabilities, their families, their loved ones. But even we've had people write into our podcast that aren't disabled but maybe went through a medical experience, and because of the experience it kind of helped when they listen to a certain episode. Like we had a medical gaslighting and medical trauma episode, and that in particular spoke to them. So I think this could be, uh it has universal appeal, which is nice too. um Lexi, did you have any questions?
Sorry, I muted myself.
I'm
Um,
gonna do
so
that.
I always, so I just wanted to ask Jordan, like, what kind of accommodations did you find you needed after, you had your career, like, because you seem to be living the dream, man. Like, come on, like, give us some accommodation accessibility secrets.
Of just like how I adjusted to life with
Yeah,
the illness, or yeah,
yeah.
well, it was very hard at the beginning. Like I got ill in February in Wisconsin, where it's like the worst month of the year. It's like -5.
Uh-huh. That
And then
freeze is nothing to be joking about.
no. And then I was on bed rest for 3 months. So like sitting in bed in
Oh,
Wisconsin winter, it was the worst. It was the worst. And I really, really struggled. I really did mentally struggled a lot during that time. But like time doesn't heal all wounds, but it sure does help. You know what I
yeah.
mean? And I think
Yeah,
I was very upset. Very like just I mean, I hardly drank. I didn't do drugs. I ran 20 miles a week. I ate good. Like I was in such good health. And it's just like, and it didn't even matter. It's just like,
yeah,
oh, one day my DNA just went like that. And it just didn't
yeah,
matter for anything. And then you just have this feeling. So, it was very hard. The two things that helped is my grandmother. Um, she is an immigrant that spent her whole life in refugee camps, basically after she was 5 years old, displaced from World War II. So the stories I grew up hearing from her, and my grandfather was a refugee as well, displaced. They called them DPs, displaced persons, and then they immigrated to America in their late teens separately. But you know, those stories when you're growing up, it's like, okay,
Well,
like,
where are those stories? I want to see those stories too.
yeah, they're very sad. That's the thing. Like that they're great, but very, very sad.
But you know, perseverance and grit.
Yes,
Like
correct.
Grit.
Yeah,
that's something to
Then
be
that-
said about
yeah,
the
Yeah.
grit of having a chronic illness and then like going through hardships like that.
totally.
And you hear their
Um,
stories, and that also helps you give yourself tenacity and grit. And
Totally.
I mean, like, yeah, those stories, like how they helped you overcome the, you know, I mean, those stories could help other people.
I
I'm just
agree.
all about
That's
storytelling though.
That's a great point. That's a great point. So yeah, talking with her helped a lot, and just thinking about her life, you know, helped a lot. You know, her mother died when she was 7, and she's in a
Wow.
refugee camp. And you know, she had a little brother that was 3 that she basically had to raise with her grandma, and her grandma had to starve herself and give the ranch rations to my grandma and my great uncle. You know, like you hear stuff
They all
like that.
sound like amazing people.
Yeah. And it's like you hear stuff like that, and it's like, okay, like I have a cure. Or I'm sorry, I don't have a cure. I have a treatment. You know, like I have a
Right.
treatment to keep going.
Yeah.
And then after that, like what I touched on in my essay, I was very fortunate to, at the job I had at the time, the owner of the company, she has Crohn's disease, and
Okay.
she knew I was really struggling, and she would check in with me, she would talk with me, and she would just like come visit, and like she'd be like, yeah, remember when I was gone for half a week in June last year, blah, blah, blah. She's like, yeah, I had intestinal surgery because the Crohn's got so bad. And she's like, I was like, but you were back on Monday. She's like, yeah, I was. You just keep going, you know? And like, she was a major help for me to like see. I mean, she's a mother, she owned an advertising agency, and she's going through Crohn's and all of that, and she's just eternally positive and happy, and still is. And you know, so like between thinking about my grandmother and her spending the time with me, really was, you know, helped me get. Of course, my wife was phenomenal too. We were engaged. She was my fiance at the time. And I'd say those three women, you know, those 3 women, and of course, you know, my parents were phenomenal too, but I'm just saying, like,
It sounds like
Support
you had a great
helps.
support
Yeah.
system.
are
Like,
what
support
really,
really
that support system is what really helped me,
Yeah.
you know,
Like Shraga was talking about.
carry
Yeah.
on. Yep. Yeah.
And with your grandparents' stories, I'm curious, did it, like I said about like teaching you grit, but did it also maybe, I like to watch true crime, and our followers know that I have a sick fascination with that. But for me, it helps keep me in perspective. So when I get really down, I watch it, and I'm reminded it could always be worse. And then I take a breath, and then I'm like, and I'm wondering if, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but hearing those stories, those atrocities, did it give you any sense of that? Or
Yeah, completely. Completely it did. You know, it completely did. So
like
yes.
gives yourself hope? And
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
that's amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, and I love that you had that relationship with your boss to
Yeah.
turn to. You know, and that's, I think, what we have to do for each other, like help each other. And like, I've been through this, here's the tools, the things that help me, but mostly I am here for you.
Mhm.
And
I
reach
agree.
out
I
to each
think
other.
the chronic illness, invisible illness support community is the biggest help, and that's ultimately why I wrote Ripple Effects. Ultimately, if that's my one thing I can accomplish, is someone struggling with a recent diagnosis or just struggling,
Yeah.
with it and they can read that and know that they're not alone. Because that's what it was for me. It's just
Yeah.
like other people are doing this, and you know what? Like how I feel is valid, and everyone said that, but like you just gotta keep going,
Yeah. Wake up every day and choose.
one day at a time, it's
Yeah.
just one day at a time.
I feel like I interrupted you, Lexi. Were you gonna say something?
I always felt like working for people with chronic illnesses was a lot easier than working for people that didn't.
I agree. Or someone that has a loved one with a chronic illness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who gets it?
It's a lot better.
Yeah.
Did you have any things that you wanted to say before we signed off, Jordan or Barbara? Like any messages for our followers?
Sure. I'm actually happy, and one of the things that I think everyone has sort of touched on already, but in terms of the difficulty sometimes when you have a disability or illness of getting out the door every day, that's actually something that we see frequently as a problem when it comes to comic book conventions. And unfortunately,
Yes.
it's become very apparent over the years, even pre-pandemic, that access is very hard, not only on-site access, but just being able to get to the location itself. I
My
think one of
friends
the
go for me.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that virtual conventions were a thing that just did not exist pre-pandemic. What's wonderful about if there's a positive that we can take away from the pandemic, virtual appearances. Jordan and I have participated in so many virtual panel discussions about ripple effects and about graphic medicine as a whole. In fact, and Christina, I'm happy to share this with you afterwards. So if you want to share it with your viewers and listeners as well, but we did a panel about graphic medicine specifically and about how storytelling can really teach and educate people about empathy and build
Oh,
empathy
wow.
through storytelling.
I
And
would
just
love that. We'll put it on the website. Yeah.
and I
We've
think
got a
that,
link also, followers, to Fanbase Press and how you can purchase Ripple Effects for yourself. So definitely make sure to check that out. Sorry, Barbara.
no worries. But I think that that's something that we need to continue to strive towards, because I know that
Yes.
as folks are getting a little more comfortable with going back to in-person events, unfortunately, there are still so many that cannot access those events, that don't have any ability to participate, to share their voice, and to experience what others are saying, even about ripple effects. So I certainly hope that we continue to push towards and make avenues towards greater accessibility, not just at comic book conventions, but all conventions, all events as well.
Yes. I think as you said, it's unfortunate that COVID happened, but that is, a silver lining, if we could say, that came from it. And more Zoom connections. Like I Zoom horror movies with my friends sometimes. So we can see each other's reactions. Because I can't always get out, but at least we can still hang out in a way. So yeah. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you so much, Jordan. Did you have anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
Thank you. Just thank you for having us on. This was so great, and just such a, great podcast to be out in the world and exist. You know what I mean? So thank you for doing this. Keep doing it. I hope. And
Oh,
just
definitely.
for listeners, I would, we talked about it a little bit, but I would definitely suggest checking out the graphic medicine community. There's just a lot of great stuff out there, a lot of different things. So, if you're interested in that, I feel like that's a great starting place.
And
Wonderful.
if I can interject one or two more things.
Sure.
One, Fanbase Press itself is on all of the social medias, so you can find us there. We're happy to interact with folks virtually through all of those platforms. Ripple Effects, you can very easily find it and more information at rippleeffectscomic.com, as well as at fanbasepress.com. And I know that I mentioned this off air, but for the benefit of your viewers and listeners, I wanted to note, as Christina mentioned at the top of the podcast, we've known each other for many years, dating back to college. And I don't mean to embarrass her. I intend this fully as a compliment, but she may be embarrassed by it yet. Christina is, and I say this with absolute truth and honesty, one of the most amazing, most talented actresses I've ever seen perform in my entire life. When I think about amazing performance performances that I've seen, and I can count on one hand, there is a performance that Christina did in college that was absolutely just stunning and beautiful. So Christina, it's an honor to be sharing the stage with you, as it were, through this podcast. And thank you all for having us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for saying those lovely words, Barbara. And it's such an honor to have you both here and participate in this. This means so much to my heart. And as you expand the Ripple universe, we'd love to have you back and talk more. So
Great.
thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
And
Bye.
listeners,
Thank you
stay
so
tuned. We'll
much.
have a after party, as we usually do with the co-hosts, in just a minute. Hi, and we're back for the after party with Nate and Lexi to talk about ripple effects and the interview that you just saw with Jordan Hart, the creator, writer, and
Illustrator.
well, colorist. Actually, I keep wanting to say illustress, or illustrator, but it's colorist. They're gonna get me on that one. And Barbara Dillon from Fanbase Press. So first of all, I love you guys' reactions to Jordan and Barbara and our discussion that we had.
I really, really, really enjoyed the comic book. And I really enjoyed, especially like, you know, there's little nuances like in the first edition, because I don't want to give anything away, no spoilers. He mentions that he likes to go to the doctor early in the morning because he has the energy, and I related to that so much because I'm like, I you know, I have to either do it really early in the morning, or I have to do it like, so I plan to have a nap beforehand because they're just so
Yeah.
draining. And, you know, so like, I really relate, like, it's little nuances like that you see throughout the comic that you're like really grateful for, which is really like kind of appealing me to the newly discovered to me, medical comic, community, world. So
Yeah.
I really enjoy that.
What did you think of Jordan and Barbara and what we talked about, Nate, in the comic?
I mean, I like the concept. What I read, I think he's asking a lot of deep philosophical questions about what it is to be sick. And in the first few pages, he talks about questions about good and evil, and says that his comic kind of plays into this field. I forget what he called it, a fallacy, because it's something that doesn't really happen, that good things happen to good people.
Yeah, I wrote that down because it was like my favorite quote, like that. And I'm glad you brought that up. He says it again at the end. Like good things happen to good people, but bad things happen to good people too. I think that's what it was.
It's
Yeah,
jerk, but the same thing.
yeah.
But I think that is sort of like, well, I think about that question a lot. I think like, why am I sick? Why am I unlucky? I mean, I've come to my own terms about it, but I thought it was interesting that the book was asking that. Like, I didn't think he would go so big on that kind of stuff. I mean, the comic itself doesn't really, I don't think, touches on that, but I think that question at the beginning sort of puts you in a mindset of what you're about to see was what he considered a fallacy, a fiction.
Yeah. Well, I think it opens up the opportunities too. And it starts to touch on some of that, you know, and that exploration of what, and I like the duality of the comic book character having the invisible disability or illness, and then the being a superhero at the same time. And he talks about that duality that many people live, as people with invisible illnesses, you know, like, and that's like a constant theme throughout the comic, like particularly because people see us as one way, but we feel like another way. So it's almost like we're leading a secret life kind of thing.
Mhm.
And there's like some themes that come up that I thought were something that we have been talking, like the three of us, and then other people that we've been talking to, like that are constantly coming up, like the fear of how you tell people and when you tell people, and will you be judged, and how you be judged, and will that affect your relationships? Will they only see you as someone who is sick all the time and not see the other aspects of you? And he says this great thing in his final essay at the end, and that's the other thing I like about it, is all these essays that he's gotten contributed by people with different illnesses and different experiences. And it's amazing how, and this I think is widespread throughout our community, is that we all may have different illnesses, different disabilities, but so many of the experiences are identifiable and universal. And he says, like, you're not alone. You're much stronger than you think. Your illness contributes to who you are, but it is not and never will be all that you are. What do you guys think about that? Like, have you ever like fought with the concept of that my disability is not who I am, you know, but then also my disability could be a strength? Like there's yeah, like, yeah, my disability could also be a strength. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, there are ways that you can be strong through the disability, and you know, like you have more empathy, hopefully, if you're doing it right. You know, but you know, it's okay that there's frustration too. It's okay that it's bad. Like,
Yeah.
but I don't want that. Like, I went to a dinner and it just seemed like that was all anyone really talked to me about was,
Your
and
health?
yeah, and I didn't really like, it's already broadcasted enough because I'm 37 and using a walker. But, you know, I mean, I it just I really wanted, like, you know, different conversation. I wanted to, like, you know, talk about Marvel or something like that, you know. But it seemed like, you know, that was what everybody kept, you know, immediately going to. And like
Yeah.
after they got that answer, they're done. Their curiosity is appeased and that's all they care about.
Like you have
But
nothing else to contribute to the conversation with, but you do.
yeah,
Like you are
and
both.
I just want to talk about normal things because, like, I get tired explaining to everybody, and you know, and you don't have to explain to everybody. You can, it's okay to say, look, that's personal and I'm just not really feeling like sharing that with you.
Yeah.
Or you know, but I, you know, you come up with those generic answers like, you know, oh, I'm just a genetic train wreck, you know, or
Yeah.
something like that, you know, whenever you just don't want to get into it because everybody keeps asking you about it. And that takes a lot of spoons to tell people about your
To
stuff.
tell
You
your
know, you're just
story
like
over and over again.
exhausted and you're like, no, I'm done. I'm done talking
Yeah.
about this.
Well, what frustrates me is when people know what your disorder is. Like the people that I really love, when they found out what I have, like they Google it. You know,
Or
they
they
take the time.
don't for like 7 years and then you realize, oh yeah, that's
Right, but they'll take the time to, like, you know, and then they might and they'll pay attention, you know, but like it's the people that like don't take the time to look it up at all that end up asking over and over. And I actually, I would rather somebody ask than not ask, because I feel like I would rather educate and help them feel comfortable, you know, so that in the future, you know, the hope is that when you make people comfortable, then eventually those questions start to go ease down, you know.
Yeah.
But it's just, you know, they're just not used to. Oh, that
But
reminds me.
also, like, I mean, it's like you and me. Like, I like talking to you because you have a chronic illness. I'll talk about my health issues with you all the time. And like at that party, a lot of them did have chronic illnesses, like especially the
Yeah.
person that I was invited by. So I was okay talking about it with her because I knew that she understood. But you know, it's like I don't really know like some of these people, and that's like the first thing, and that's a little disheartening
But
because
maybe it's if what I'm not communicating this the way I want to, but I guess
you
the
can
more
work
I'm
good.
realizing is, and this, the comic book actually made me think about it more too, is that you never know what battle somebody is fighting and what they may or may not connect to or understand.
Yeah.
So even though I look at them and I'm like, well, you don't have an invisible illness, they just may
But
not
they
have told
may,
me
yeah.
that, or they may have someone in their lives who did, or they may be able to relate to it in a different way. The Jordan does such a great job of breaking down some of the basics, like you talked about the fatigue in the morning or the medical debt. How many, like, you guys can relate to like your parent, like, well, in this version, like, you know, the parents are accruing that debt for him and helping him out, and it brings up the topic of you being on like your health insurance, parents insurance till 25. But also think of school debt and things like that, you
Yeah.
know, and like other debt and things like that. But
Like I have a lot of college debt because I failed out of college because my condition got too bad on my senior,
yeah,
like on my last year. Like,
yeah. But ah,
mm,
my notes, I was telling Lexi, I was like, I have all these notes, Nate, because I got really excited, and I was trying to look at them when we were talking to Jordan and Barbara too, and it literally looks like a serial killer's notebook, because my handwriting like used to be very pretty when I was younger, and like the more I deal with Ehlers-Danlos and the
HMs.
hypermobility of my joints and getting older and the arthritis and everything, like whoo, it looks bad. But
You don't get the hand weakness whenever you're writing too long.
oh yeah, but I had beautiful I had these wonderful braces for my joints in my hands, and one of my caretakers stole them several years ago. So I think I have two left.
You need
Um,
you need finger joint rings.
yeah, I have some now, but they're not as good. They're ugly. And they don't work well. But oh, like, so those basics, like the medical debt, the being a burden to your family or your friends, like George is talking about with his family, and
Yeah.
always having to take his insulin around, because if he doesn't have his insulin because he's diabetic, then like his symptoms come up, like, you know, and it's like we always talk about that, like maybe not on air, but like we've got, like, I've got a bag that I have to pack everywhere I go. It's got my caretaker cheat sheet, it's got my medicines, it's got like all this stuff that you've got to like travel with. And like my caretaker's car, she's got not only my rollator but my wheelchair, and I've got the cane. So it's like I'm loaded with whatever I need that day. Hopefully I won't need like all of it, but you're prepared, because, and I've been without, and then you're like, you're screwed. Oh, and my big thing for me is like not insulin, but my ice caps that I wear. If I go and I forget to bring ice with me, um, like, and my ice caps or the ice vest, like I will get really, really, really sick, like heat stroke sick. Um, and that happens a lot. Um, can you guys relate to that? That having to carry around stuff with you a lot, or like changes for different stuff?
Well, I had to start using a lunchbox because I got tired of all the Medicaid drivers making comments on all my medicines and how I shouldn't be on them. Like they're Uber drivers and they're like, "You don't need those medicines." And I'm like, "Yeah, I need this massive bag of medicine."
Yeah.
So I eventually just turned it into a lunchbox just because I was like so sick of them, using the Ziploc bag and then making comments about how many meds I'm on.
Yeah.
And, I used to have a job and my nickname was the walking pharmacy.
Yeah.
And, you know, yeah. And just like last night, had to go to, like, I went to my first event trying to test out, I'm exhausted. Um, I've been sleeping all the time because it just wore me out, that one event. It was my first attempt at going out and having a social life in like 2 years.
And I was
And
like, "You look great." And she's like, "Last night's makeup." And I was like, "Babe, I get,
yeah,
yeah."
that's the only thing saving me right now. But no, it was a good event. I just, I really enjoyed it. It's just, those little things that, just kind of you you wish you were normal. You want to be normal again or normal-ish. I'll never
Yeah.
be normal.
Yeah.
Normal would
What
be
about
cheap.
you, Nate?
I used to, well, before the fast, I used to bring food with me everywhere. Like I would bring my day's worth of food in like a bag, and I would bring like a smoothie to drink in case I got tired. Because as soon as I got a little tired, I would feel it immediately. So I'd have to
Yeah.
I'd pretty much be eating like all day, like little bits, and it was so exhausting to sort of have to maintain that all day. It was just frustrating because I never used to have to do that before, like my big disability moment and at your birthday.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just these little
I'll
things,
never
like
live that
massive
down, Nate.
mountains. Like just like eating. You wouldn't think eating would be a problem and be exhausting, but it is exhausting. Like sometimes you don't eat because you're just too exhausted to go to the kid. Like, I know whenever Christina comes to visit, we lay in bed, and we have attacks. And, if one of us needs to go get something, whoever's the best has to go get it.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's these
Literally
little
have
things like
like
just going to get food or water.
applesauce, like what I don't even know if you could see it, but I have these little
Yeah.
packets of applesauce,
You have a
nuts
stash by the bed
stashed
because you
by the
have to.
bed
I
when
do.
I'm through those days. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to have stuff ready because you sometimes you don't know whether you're going to be capable
Yeah.
of making something. Like
But
I
sometimes getting ready makes you have the attack. So then,
Yeah. Yeah. And last night I had to have Hillary, I'd been tired and all, but I for the past couple weeks, but I had a horrible migraine yesterday and I was like, I can't keep getting up to go to the bathroom. And so he moved my bedside commode to make sure that I would have access to it. Something I didn't even think of to have my caretaker do on Fridays just in case,
yeah.
um because it changes. And uh thought it was cool too. Uh I'm like going in total like, oh, going to what you were talking about, Lexi, about you talked almost about humor, like blowing people off with humor, like when you're talking with people and then like the situation of going to this party. Jasmine Joyner in her article wrote this great thing about the thing that often will happen with people with invisible illnesses is you get in this thing of leaving people before they have a chance to leave you,
Yeah.
because like that repetitive hurt over and over again of being let down. And I identify with this so much, that quote. And then it's
Well, it's
in that,
almost
and
like
like,
the percentage. It's almost like
yeah,
the
and
percentage.
George is doing that and sometimes too. And then like I what but it's not just like romantic relationships. It's it's friendships and part like because he says, I wrote this down. What if someone finds out I'm sick? I'm sorry, but I've got enough to worry about, Um, what what do you guys think of that? That him, George saying, I've got enough to worry about, and what if someone finds out I'm sick?
Nate, you want to go first? I feel like I
Well,
keep jumping in.
I used to hide beginnings, but these days I don't care. Like it's pretty obvious I'm sick, and if you don't notice that I'm sick, that's on you. It's not on me. Like
Yeah.
it's like I'm not walking right. I know I'm not walking right. So if you can look at me and say, "Oh, I didn't notice anything about you," that's your complete lack of like awareness.
Perception.
That's not my problem. I don't think people could know that I'm sick. Like I'm not hiding it. I'm not a superhero. Like I'm not this is not my mask. Like I'm not trying to lead a double life.
But at one point you were.
I was. Yeah. Well, because
Yeah.
it was easy to hide, so I never talked about it, never brought it up. If I could, I was pretty physically fit, and it seemed like I was, if anything, more than healthy.
What scared you about people knowing?
Well, I think my parents and my grandparents instilled in me that my disease was a precious secret. And if I told people, they would treat me different.
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't tell my employers because they'd fire me. I couldn't tell I don't know. I mean, I told my friends, but they didn't seem to really understand or care. It just was like it was something I kept secret because it was my precious, like I had to keep it secret and keep it safe.
Yeah.
And
Else you'd be judged.
it was exhausting. And also, when you ever went to the doctor and told you had that thing, they would treat you differently. They would say, "Oh, you have that thing? Well, we have to start doing stuff for that thing. We don't care what's actually wrong with you. We want to start giving like I when I was living in Richmond, I went to the hospital with extreme vertigo. As soon as I told them I had my thing, they stopped testing me for what I came in the hospital for and started figuring out how they were going to give me some very expensive MRIs since my insurance did not cover it. That was an experience for me. And I just really felt like in the moment, like never share your illness with a hospital person unless you are going there specifically for that.
Well, and I think you hit on something you said too. You started to say too was that the exhaustion of holding that secret,
Yeah.
right? Like how exhausting it is, and that gives its own toll on your illness, right?
Right.
And maybe what we need to is create a world where patients feel safe to disclose those things. Because I know like there's certain things, you're scared to share as a patient, as a woman, things like that. Else you be labeled as, crazy, or like your symptoms are because they're not actually related to a physiological thing. It's psychosomatic. um there's
You're
so many
crazy.
things.
They
It's
don't
in
want
your
to deal
head.
with it, so you're crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like what my parents did. That's what my best friends always did. It was always I was crazy, not that, I
Yeah,
was sick and I'm
not that you
sick.
have something.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I was in denial too. So
Yeah.
like, I mean, because I didn't want to be sick. And like, I honestly, like, I thought that was normal. I thought fibro flares were normal. I thought everybody felt like that.
Well, because it's our normal, right? I
Yeah.
didn't
Right.
realize women are supposed to sweat because, you always hear that phrase when, girls don't sweat. My mom didn't sweat, so I grew
There's a
up
sweat
watching that.
fairy and you
Yeah.
didn't get
And
it.
like literally years later, I'm getting, my tilt table and they're testing like sweat. And they're like, oh, yeah, you don't sweat like you're supposed to. This is probably why you're overheating. And I'm like, well, that explains so much. And it didn't even occur to me to tell that to my doctors because and so there, I think that goes into how are we talking to patients about their symptoms and history? Because sometimes patients don't know to tell you certain symptoms because it's what you said, like it's your normal, it's your experience.
Yeah.
Right.
And oh, I think I love what George says, I'm literally my greatest enemy.
Mm,
Like talking about his body like attacking himself. I feel that all the time. And that's what I love when Salvador says they're both gifts. Your power and your disabilities make you a better hero than any of us. Uh but I think it's what George is learning is how to turn something crappy into something positive. And like what Jordan has, like, I so identify with Jordan when he talked about, and I'd love to hear what you guys think, when he talked about being diagnosed in his 20s, because that's when I was. And it's like, I was married, I was planning on having babies, I had my whole career mapped out for myself. And then everything went away. And I didn't know I didn't know who I was. I didn't know how I was gonna have a life that I wanted that would make me happy. And I didn't know what to do. It was devastating. And it still is, it still is, because you're still so I love how he's turned something that was so traumatic to him and turning it into, like Bill, like on first season when we talked about like how his son was shot, and he was in theater, and now like he's still a theater professor and a theater professional, but he is touring the country doing talks about trauma and helping people, with his book and with talks. And it's so cheesy, but making lemon out of lemonade and finding a new you, I guess.
reverse what you said.
Finding the real you. How do
No,
I reverse that?
making lemonade out of lemons. You don't make lemon out of lemonade.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
I get so verbally dyslexic sometimes. I felt so bad when I was stage managing.
It's
When I
actually a big symptom of ours.
Verse what
Really,
you
because I
say.
reverse numbers all the time, because I would call out anybody that's ever been a stage manager or knows stage managing in theater, and you have to do the cues. And my light ops hated me because I would try to say the light cues and I would always invert them and mess them up and all that stuff. And they're like, which one do you want, Christine? I'm like, just say go, just go. And they're like, no, it's really important to know which light cue.
No, that's
Yeah.
part of our aura, is that we a lot of times will end up, like, I know that I'm gonna have a big hemiplegic migraine if I switch my words. If I
Well,
get
this
inverted,
was
I know
before
that
I
I'm
was
gonna
having those, but like I do like I've always had a little bit of that, and I think it's just made it
But that's
worse.
probably because you were having migraines your whole life and didn't know it.
I realized now I was having them as a kid.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
what we thought were sleep disorder was Alice in Wonderland syndrome, like where things get bigger and smaller, is actually a form of a migraine. It was so traumatic as a child, so traumatic. But yeah, but what do you guys think about like Jordan and getting the diagnosis in his 20s and like the whole life? And it's almost kind of what's happening to George, right? Too, like he gets diabetes, I guess, like as a teen, but like what he wants to do, be a writer, everything, you know. I don't know,
Yeah.
thoughts.
I'm
Well-
jealous. I wish I was diagnosed in my 20s, because I feel like maybe it would be managed better and I wouldn't be at this point right now. I'd still be able to work.
When were you
But huh?
when were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed, well, with hemiplegic migraines about 8 years ago.
Okay.
And I was doing gym and everything. I was like a gym rat and everything. And
Yeah.
after I got diagnosed, I because I had my it wasn't my first one, but it was like they were starting to get regular. So I finally ended up going to the ER and getting diagnosed. I'm jealous of it. I'm jealous of people that got diagnosed early. Mainly because like the system and, also like my personal life, like my struggles with my family and them gaslighting me all the time. So like, I'm he really touched, like I'm jealous of it, but I'm really like I identified with that scariness of whenever you're first diagnosed. And and I just think it's remarkable how he pulled through, and he's doing this great thing for everybody. And he's even getting out his friend's side of the story, and like
Yeah.
we need more visuals of disabled life, and he's doing a great job at really capturing invisible illnesses. And I really like, and it's not just what we talk about a lot, what George has, but there's other people, other superheroes in there that are struggling with other invisible illnesses. And I really think that it's great that he's like touching in on these, and especially some that are really not very well known about. And I don't want to like, I'm trying to not give spoilers here. But I think he did a great job. And
Well, and I think
Barbara and them like taking their whole life to like do this publishing of like these great comics, like that passion. I love that about them. And and you can tell just how passionate, and just also what a cool person she is. Her vibe is awesome. But like just the fact that they worked so hard to get that publishing out. And just I'm really proud of them. I'm really proud of all of them for what they came out with. Like, it's a great piece of art.
Yeah. Well, and I think so many people will identify with what you're talking about, the jealousy of early diagnosis, because it's so many people with a lot of chronic illnesses, it takes years to diagnose. And for a lot, like this is February 28th is Rare Disease Awareness Day. And so a lot of disorders, and in particular disorders that apply to women, are diagnosed, take years to diagnose. Women are diagnosed later in life. So I think a lot of people will relate to that. But what is so universal still, we still relate to a lot of what he went through, even though like it's an earlier diagnosis by like a decade, but it's still, he talked about how it would affect his career and the trajectory of how he would be able to do the career that he wanted. And and
The
impact that the adaptations that he had to put on his life and stuff. Like he still had like,
and that is the hardest part, I think, is
a very hard thing. Nate, you were gonna say something.
Oh, a while ago. But I mean,
Sorry.
I got diagnosed in my 20s, just like George. It was different for me because my dad had the thing I got diagnosed with. So when I got diagnosed, I was like, oh, yeah, sure, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I knew what it was. I knew what it did, and I saw what it did. And I was like, well, I started making plans. I started saying, I got to check off bucket lists. I got to figure out, like, I knew. It's so sad looking back. Like, I'm almost tearing up because as soon as I got that diagnosis, I was like, because at the time I just started dating this girl and things were really great. Like, really great. It was perfect. And then I got diagnosed and I was just like, I cannot ever marry you now. I mean, not that I was thinking about it, but in the back of my mind, I was like, this can't,
It
I
took away that option for you.
because I was like, well, I can't have kids. I can't, like, I can't burden you because I love you.
That is
Yeah.
a really hard emotion to go through, is like the feeling of being a burden on everybody, especially because
Yeah.
you can't.
Still feels
it-
that way more so. And I mean, I think what I did was I pulled away, like, I ran from everything. Like, I ended up living down in Richmond by myself. I had my friends from college. I stopped, interacting with them except for like big events, and I stopped like I just I just ran away from everything. And then when things fell apart, I had to call my mom and have her come get me. And I mean, that's one thing I'm thankful for, is that things did fall apart because it did bring me back to family and friends. But I really was just so, I don't know, lost. I thought I'd found something down in Richmond, but it wasn't, it was not real.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
I
I
know.
mean, that is a big thing. You don't want to be a burden, but also like, with your friends, you're just kind of you're isolated, especially because, they all, they want to go do stuff and you can't really. And, a lot of them just don't want to come. But like, whenever you're going through, especially in the very beginning with the diagnosis, it's so scary, but you find out who your real friends are. It weeds them out
Yeah.
really well.
It
And
really does.
and so that's one thing you can be grateful for.
Yeah.
And luckily I had some really good friends that let me live with them. They supported my illness. I have a lot of friends that would drop anything and go pick me up if I had an attack somewhere,
Yeah.
if I got abandoned somewhere. Like, I'm really, really, really grateful for the people that showed up and
Stick around.
well, they also care enough to care. They care enough to look it up. Care enough to ask how I'm doing. They care enough to be like, look, we're going to find a way to get a wheelchair at wherever we're going, and we're going to make sure that you're
We'll make
comfortable,
this
but we're going to
happen.
get you out of that fucking house. Like, that
You
is
could go roller skating, Lexi. We'll just stick each other in a wheelchair and get people to push us around the ring, right? It's
Yeah.
about adapt. Like, there was a great article included about in Ripple Effects about this woman's experience going to Disneyland. I think Jordan talked about it too, and about like how it ruined the trying to make the experience better for, she had chronic fatigue syndrome, and trying to make the experience better for everybody else ruined the experience for her because she was so busy worried about everybody else being happy. She overdid it. And like, how many times have you guys like overdone it, or you're like, or like, or I just won't go because I don't want to ruin it for people, or like
Well, I have chronic fatigue, and I can tell you, yeah, every day is just overdoing it and then trying to recover. Like, you
Yeah.
have a good day, and that is a big thing. Whenever it's so taxing to be, not taxing, that's a wrong word. It's so, and draining's not the right word either. It just takes it out of you
yeah.
to socialize. And because you have to adapt to the able people, and then they don't understand, so they get frustrated with you, and you're just trying to avoid like miscommunications and
Yeah.
being a burden, because we don't want to be a burden.
How much energy though would it save if you could? It's like the spoon theory. If you could take Ripple Effects and go, here, read this. This gives you kind of a glimpse into my life. I'm gonna go take a nap, and we'll talk when you're done reading. Because it does, like, just thinking of those, because it does take effort to explain and explain and explain. But I personally feel it is part of our jobs, but it's the community's jobs, not necessarily as individual. Just get the information out there, educate, because the more people understand this, the less afraid of it is. The less afraid of these things they are. Like someone said, uh, we are way too secretive about health issues, and that secrecy is a killer. I like underlined it, and it is, because it's almost like we have to be ashamed of our illnesses, our disability, like what you were talking about too, Nate, like that shame of what we have. Like I almost felt like at the beginning of it's like leprosy, and like when he's like, I'm afraid people will know I have it. Like it, and I really feel it's like, like what if people know and then they'll think of me differently. um but it is a part of you, and it is okay, and it's just that we need to learn to communicate better, educate people, and um everybody has experiences, even if they don't have health experience. I mean, everybody has some kind of health experience they can relate to, or somebody in their family. But it's like, it's those adaptations, which makes me excited, because next month we're actually having a guest on from DARS, the Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services, to talk about working and disability, like what DARS does and resources like that to help people with disability continue at work at their job with accommodations, or find a new career that they could be happy at with accommodations. And so many people don't realize that these resources are out there for them. And like, these are what your tax dollars are doing. These are important organizations that help people. And like, can you imagine if, like, and I don't know if Jordan used a company like DARS or anything like that, but imagine how people would feel less ashamed. Like you talked about, Nate, that fear of telling your employer you get fired, right? So what is the process of doing that? And like, how do you protect yourself with, with ADA and like all of that kind of stuff? So that is something I wanted to broach on, was the idea of work and disability, which comes up in the like in our interview with Jordan, and then also in the comic. Thoughts on that?
Working with a disability is incredibly hard, and I've lost so many jobs because of different disabilities, whether it was PCOS or hemiplegic migraines or long COVID. So I mean, it's it's easier whenever you have somebody that either has a chronic illness or has a family member with a chronic illness. I love working for them because they actually sometimes understand, especially
like Jordan was talking about.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
like that makes everything so much better. I just, if it's not, then they don't, it's hard, because in this society you are only as good as what you produce, and we can't produce a lot. So a lot of that, we go from a societal aspect of, that being our value, and we have to redefine our value. And that's hard. That is the hardest part, I think, about, because you've lost that. For me, I was a workaholic. I had 4 jobs at one point. Like, I owned my own business. I was also like, doing a bunch of other stuff for friends' businesses, and like, being a personal assistant and working at you know, I did a lot. I've always like had a lot of jobs, and I've always prided myself, been proud of the fact that I worked hard. And so it's really hard to go from being a workaholic to sitting in a bed doing nothing. And I know that if I wasn't a workaholic, I probably wouldn't have been in this bed. You know, if I had paced
No,
myself.
no, that's not that
You still would be, Lexi.
Huh?
you didn't do this to you
You
for
did
work.
not do your, yeah, thank you, Nate.
How many people do you know that are workaholics and they're totally fine? Like, it's not, that's not the thing. It might have contributed to you being sicker faster, but it didn't do it.
Well, no,
I
I
think
didn't
that's
mean
a common feeling, is that
Mm,
we have, that we do this to ourselves, or that we're lazy, or we're going to be perceived of as
oh
lazy.
my God,
And
yeah.
then like you
yeah.
force yourself to do things that you're not physically capable of doing, or at a rate that you shouldn't be doing, because you're scared of how you're going to be perceived. You're not taking out care of yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the laziness thing has followed me my whole life. Like, I was always tired, so always
Yeah.
labeled as lazy. You know, even though I was doing a lot, I would always have to like sit because I was
Yeah.
exhausted. And my head was always foggy and lightheaded.
Yeah.
And I realized that that was something I should think about. You know, I used to get lightheaded from like standing up, but it wouldn't affect me because I was pretty fit. Like, it wouldn't set me off balance, but I noticed it. It was drastic.
Yeah.
And that was before I was ever like really sick.
One time I tried to deliver a pizza on a high-speed elevator. I was delivering pizzas at the time, and my pots, whoo, it was like you go up to 22 floors in like 1 second. And then I got up there, and I'm like so dizzy trying to give these people their pizzas. And I finally get there, and then I had to go down the elevator, and it was just so quick. Like my body hadn't had time to even adjust from going up. So whenever I went down, oh, I almost went down. Like I
Yeah.
was like, the doors opened, and I just remember doing this and just being black and trying not to fall on the floor.
Now imagine that was part of your superpower. Welcome to ripple effects.
What, the ability to pass out at any point?
Yeah. That's your.
New character for Jordan.
Yeah. If you guys could have a superpower to go with your illness, like in ripple effects, like diabetes type 1, you get invulnerability. What do you get with Ehlers-Danlos? What superpower is your kryptonite almost? Like, what does it make? Like, what is the duality of Ehlers?
Well, obviously we're bendy with Ehlers-Danlos.
Yes.
So
There
you're
you
like-
go.
What
We'd be like the Invisibles.
Mr. Incredible? No.
The Incredibles? Yeah, you're
Mrs.
right. Not the Invisibles.
Not Invisible.
Mrs. Incredible. Mrs. Incredible. The
Yeah.
can stretch.
That's who we are.
Okay.
We are Cirque du Soleil.
Yeah.
Mr. Fantastic was the one, wasn't it? No, it was
Our
Wasn't
kryptonite is collagen.
wasn't Mr. Fantastic the one that could,
Estrogen too.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it was it was somebody that had the
yeah,
bending
the Fantastic
powers.
Four, in the Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
What would
I can't
yours
remember.
be?
I thought it was
Nate?
the dude, the main
Oh,
dude.
mine be. I thought about. Well, it's different. Like, what power I would have with MS is different from the power that I want. I want
Okay.
the power of luck because I think it's the best power. Like, no matter,
Okay.
Like
People-
Domino.
yeah, like Domino, or there was a Lucky Man was the one that Stan Lee made, but he also made Domino. But I love her power because she has no powers. She's
Yeah.
just
She's just lucky.
she's just lucky. Everything she does is awesome. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what superpower you have, she will win because she's just lucky.
Yeah.
It trumps all of their powers.
I do
Okay.
like that one. That's a really good one. I might have to steal that.
It's the
What would
best.
you want, Lexi?
Well,
That
now
makes
I
sense.
want that because I have shit luck.
I know. We would
Um,
have no disease. We would
I
have.
want flight though. This inability to drive and like go, like that freedom
Yeah.
with being in the car and just going. Like, yeah, I want that, the freedom of flight.
Realistically, with the HMs, I think our superpower would be like supervision or super hearing for you.
Oh,
'Cause I
I've
don't
got
think the
super
auditory-
sniffing.
Oh yeah, you're the super sniffer.
I am
Oh,
the
that's-
super sniffer already.
She's a
I'm like
bloodhound.
a nurse called
She's an
me a
overheated
wolf.
bloodhound.
I am an overheated blood. I'd be Ice Woman.
Yes.
That would be super cool. And then my costume would literally just be ice. Like cold packs, all full body cold packs.
No, you
Mhm.
wouldn't
Like
have to.
heaters
You
on
could
my
just
feet and
create, like
hands.
an ice dress to
No,
chill.
my head's gotta have the ice cap.
Well, you
You'd
can
be like-
have a
you'd be like
crown like the
also-
queen you
And
are.
Lexi's gotta have the glass, like giant Ray-Ban like
Oh,
glasses.
Cyclops glasses.
Nate,
Yeah.
you'd have like he always had the coolest canes. Like I could see you like going kung fu on somebody with that.
Yeah, that's why I originally got the cane. But now that I'm disabled, I actually use it as a cane.
Yeah.
Oh, does it have a sword inside?
It should, but it does not.
Well, there you go.
Because I can
Probably.
imagine you being like in the league.
Pulling it
Wasn't
out
there a
like
dude
the
in the League of
League
Extraordinary?
Extraordinary Gentlemen. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, in the movie or okay, do you see ripple effects as a okay, what actor would play George?
Tom Holland.
Ugh, okay, maybe. I don't know. I was looking at him skinny. I was thinking Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Oh, I could see a little Joseph there. Oh, who's that guy from Criminal Minds? But he's gotten older now. But that type.
Like younger him.
What about
Yeah,
Andrew
younger him.
Garfield? What about Andrew Garfield?
Oh, I love Andrew Garfield.
Yeah.
You know what is interesting about George in this comic too, like having the diabetes type 1, is that on February 30th, our personal story with disability is we're having Jonathan, and he's going to share his personal story with autism and diabetes. So
Are you making a joke again?
me?
Yeah.
No, that's real. That's happening.
Because
Yeah.
we went over this. You said, like, when you talked about the dates.
Did I say 30th again?
You did. Yeah. There's no such date ever.
28th. Jonathan actually corrected me. He's like, Christina, there's no 28th of February. I was like,
We're
I
never
got it right
publishing it.
online. I swear I got it right
Just
on the
kidding, Jen.
website.
Now you flipped it in.
So
Okay.
February 28th, if you try for February 30th, you will miss this amazing episode. So February
You'll be
28th,
waiting forever because there's never.
it will be because it doesn't exist. Any final thoughts on ripple effects? Or I loved what you talked about in the interview, Nate, about like the future, the world of ripple effects, like
Yeah,
where
the
Jordan sees it going. Yeah, like
RECU.
I want to see
Yeah.
all of the and I want to see all the disabilities. I want
Yeah.
to see his take on all the disabilities
There's a bunch of like sick people.
forever.
I hope he continues to include art essays from people with different invisible illnesses, because I found those really enlightening and beneficial and moving. Like I really identified with them, and I also could see why he specifically included it in the part that he did. And stay tuned, listeners. We've got lots of Spoonie Sundays coming up, but also more importantly, on February 28th, not the 30th, February 28th, you will hear Jonathan's personal story with autism and diabetes. And then coming up in March, we'll have a representative from DARS in Virginia to talk about working and disability. And then we have a local writer from Richmond who is an advocate and now author. She is writing her book, or she has published her book, called I'll pray for you, and other outrageous things people say to disabled people, where we can further this conversation, Lexi and Nate. So I think this was just so apropos. Stay safe and happy spoons.
If you want to contact us, please send a DM or an email to speakingatspoons@gmail.com with any stories you have, or if you'd like to interview with us on any of our upcoming topics. Thank you for listening to Speaking in Spoons, and have a great day.